The Florida Everglades, vast, grassy, and so shallow that you could wade this prairie without getting your knees wet. In the morning, everything is cool and delicate, nothing threatening, just shallow water and a clump of pickerel weed, or maybe a swamp lily, more fresh and beautiful than anything a florist might see back in Miami. And the clouds already building on this summer morning are as delicate as the lily. The same is not true of the tough sawgrass that fills the waters and thrusts its seedy stalks a few inches above our heads. In these grassy waters, the great egret finds minnows, though not as many as he would like. And the white-tailed deer browses on plants, even eating the tender bases of the sawgrass blades, avoiding the sharp teeth that can scratch and cut the unprotected ankles of people. The tremendous life-giving potential of the Everglades is helped by an inch-thick mat of algae that covers the floor of the wetland. The mat is called periphyton, and its yellow color gives the water itself the appearance of being yellow. Periphyton is like a living sponge, and this sponge is most important during the winter dry down, when the eggs and the spores of countless microorganisms are able to endure in the damp interior. Under this carpet of periphyton lies the Biscayne Aquifer, that flat shelf of limestone rock forming the floor of the great wetland. Here and there, weak acids in the water have dissolved pockets in the limestone floor. Without these ponds, Everglades wildlife could not survive. Here, the American alligator rules his domain. For the many animals sharing habitat with one of these 10 to 12-foot reptiles, it is wise to keep a careful lookout for the alligator, for any animal can get preoccupied and forget the world around him from time to time, and that animal, of course, will be food for the alligator. The many birds that visit these ponds have given the Everglades a reputation as one of the best places for bird watching. The common moorhen is in the same family as the flashy purple gallinule. Both birds have gigantic feet for walking over water plants. This helps the gallinule as he tears into spatterdock leaves looking for insect larvae. The anhinga spreads her wings to dry. It is a familiar sight on the edge of an Everglades pond. Like other birds, the anhinga has an oil gland at the base of her tail. She uses her bill to apply the oil to her feathers. This also keeps her bill in good condition. Now that her wings are dry, it's right back into the water. A mature male anhinga is a striking creature with a black neck and blue skin patches around his eyes. With a neck like a snake and a tail like a turkey, it's not surprising the anhinga has two nicknames, snakebird and water turkey. He is a spearer of fish, and when he gets one, the anhinga has to flip it so it slides down head first. On the edge of the pond, trying his best to think about getting a meal and not becoming one himself, the raccoon reaches into the soft mud to feel for any slimy thing that might be there, a salamander, a fish, a snail. And the alligator watches. Spatterdock flowers rise like fists above the surface of the pond. For the red-bellied turtle, this presents a problem. He can see the flowers well enough, he just can't get his jaws on them. It is believed that many animals can learn to solve problems by trial and error. The red-bellied turtle has discovered that when all else fails, he can straddle the flower and push it down. and maybe it won't pop up quite as high as it had been before. Petal by petal, the spatterdock flower is picked apart and discarded. In the center is the nutritious core, the only part of the flower the turtle actually eats. In the same pond, bladderwort flowers also poke above the surface. But the tail here has a darker side. Beneath the small flowers is a world of microscopic horror. Dotting the underwater vegetation of the bladderwort plant, there are BB-sized bladders that suck in and digest tiny mosquito larvae, seed shrimp, and red water mites. Predation is a way of life in the pond. Even the plants can devour you. And so food works its way up the food chain, the larger eating the smaller. No animal seems safe in the water, except this one. He alone rules the pond, all 400 pounds of it. The sight of an alligator feeding is so rare, a tourist might never know what he has just missed. Besides the endless miles of water, there are some spots of dry land in the Everglades. Here, a rise of several feet makes for an entirely different world. Often this world is an island of hardwood trees, a hammock as it is called. Filmmakers Rick and Rick Kern and fellow naturalist John Green venture into a dark subtropical habitat where the canopy of branches is thick and the barred owl stands sentinel over a world of living things far different than can be found in the surrounding glades. Here, subtropical hardwoods like the paradise tree, the mahogany, and the pigeon plum crowd together in competition for sunlight. The strangler fig, with its profusion of prop roots, makes the word jungle seem appropriate, especially the way the roots seem to ooze and flow into a big solution hole in the limestone. Nearby, the gumbo limbo tree peels as if suffering from a never-ending sunburn. At its base, honeybees have set up shop in a cavity left by termites. Life is rampant in the hammock. Shafts of light reveal a world of bromeliads and other epiphytes that cling to the bark of trees rather than growing in the soil. The strap fern is among them. So is the butterfly orchid. Turn too quickly here and you get a huge golden silk spider in your face, or a little spiny-bodied spider along with its sticky web. A jumping spider will flash his iridescent mouth parts if a beam of sunlight strikes him. There are some surprising bits of color in the hammock. The brown anole displays his bright fan whenever he's feeling macho. Ligulous tree snails appear as multicolored jewels, and it is surprising to see such a range of color within a single species. In the drier months, new dashes of color turn out to be exquisite buntings arriving from the north. Is the male indigo bunting more beautiful, or the male painted bunting? It's a toss-up. On the floor of the hammock and in dry woodlands throughout Florida grows a lush and beautiful cycad. In years past, Indians and early settlers dug this plant and used its starchy underground stem as a food staple. They called the plant kunti. In the Everglades, the leaves of kunti are also consumed. They are eaten by the larva of a rare and beautiful butterfly called atala. Kunti leaves are the caterpillar's only food. For a time, atala was so rare that for 30 years not a single living specimen could be found. The butterfly was feared extinct. Then atala was found on an island near Miami and reintroduced into the Everglades to live again among the cycads. Of all the hammock's magnificent creatures, perhaps none is more fascinating than the zebra butterfly, common though it is. The larva of the zebra looks like it is made of the finest porcelain, and it too is a fussy eater. This caterpillar munches only the leaves of the passion vine, and it is upon those leaves that the zebra butterfly lays her tiny eggs. In time, the larva forms a chrysalis, and this is no ordinary thing to see. It is decorated with golden spots. 2 of the spots look like eyes, even though they're not, and there is a devilish set of horns, such that when you turn the chrysalis upside down, it looks really spooky. When the female chrysalis has hung for 7 days, it begins to attract the attention of passing males. Perhaps a type of odor or pheromone is emitted into the air. In any case, the males cannot resist it. As dusk arrives in the hammock, males begin to clutch onto the chrysalis, and there, several of them spend the night. Not far away, the rest of the zebras in this hammock have set up a communal roost. Loneliness is never a problem with the zebra butterfly. As the sun rises, the male zebras are still waiting, but they will not wait for long. Within the hour, on this 8th day, the chrysalis begins to swell and crack its papery exoskeleton, and out emerges the awaited princess. How long will her virginity be preserved? Not long. At the first opportunity, in fact immediately, even before her wings are unfurled, one of the males attaches to her, and the butterflies begin to mate. Is this the end of the story? Not quite, for the event which we now observe is never a private one. Other males soon arrive on the scene and set up a fluttering and a pestering. They cannot seem to take no for an answer. It is a surprising slice of life in the hidden world of the hammock. In the heart of the Everglades, the hardwood hammocks are long and narrow, as if they've been shaped by flowing water. The idea that the Everglades should be thought of as a moving river was first proposed by Marjorie Stoneman Douglas in her 1947 book, The Everglades, River of Grass. Ms. Douglas pointed out that the apparent stillness of the water was only an illusion, that the Everglades were a wide and shallow slow-motion river. We caught up with Marjorie Stoneman Douglas on the year of her 100th birthday. She is still fighting to protect the Everglades. But the main source of Everglades water is far to the north in the prairies above Lake Okeechobee. Here, water follows the tilt of the land flowing down the Kissimmee River and down Fish-Eating Creek. From the lake, the water continues south, drifting almost imperceptibly, a 50-mile wide sheet of water, nudged along by a slope of only 1 inch every mile. As it approaches the coast, it begins to mix with salt water from the bay, and clumps of red mangroves start to dot the prairies. Southward, the mangroves grow thicker, and at the coast, their prop roots form a barrier against storms and a hiding place where fish and shrimp can breed. From there, the waters of the Everglades join the waters of Florida Bay, and the river is lost to the sea. It is December, and the dry season has begun. By the crack of dawn, many wading birds have already dropped into Mrazek Pond. The pond has hit critical mass. By this, it is meant that the drying of the pond has suddenly concentrated the fish. For about 5 days, the birds will feed like mad, deplete the fish, and leave. This is a once-a-year bonanza, and you never know in what winter month Mrazek will explode with birds. For the white ibis, this is a chance to probe the muddy bottom of the pond with its very long, down-curved bill. With this method, the ibis is more likely to catch a shrimp than a fish. The endangered wood stork uses the mousetrap technique of catching fish. When a fish touches the inside of his open bill, it snaps shut in a 40th of a second. It's a reflex. The stork doesn't have to see his prey or even think about it. Also feeding by touch, the roseate spoonbill uses this distinctive head-swinging method. But while those other birds are also found in freshwater ponds, the spoonbill prefers the salty waters of the mangrove swamps. Here, shrimp and crabs are often caught. Within them is a chemical that gives the roseate spoonbill its vibrant color. Each kind of wading bird has its own type of bill, its own method of fishing, its own niche. But when the alligator shows up, you forget all that. You pay attention. Maybe you find another niche. The tall and graceful herons don't feed by touch. They feed by sight, and they are very precise. One of the most startling fishing techniques is called foot dragging, and it is sometimes used by the snowy egret, that little heron with the black legs and golden slippers. It is not certain whether the snowy drags its feet to stir up minnows or to attract them, but it's a wonderful ballet in slow motion. From all over the Everglades, herons and other wading birds converge on the most productive winter feeding grounds. Across the mangroves, they glide in great formations, hunting for masses of birds where fish are concentrated. For the roseate spoonbills, already nesting on nearby islands in Florida Bay, these mangrove wetlands are hitting their peak precisely when fish are most needed for the raising of young. It is late January on Sandy Key, hardly a stone's throw from the tip of the mainland. In one corner of the island, a small colony of spoonbills is hidden in the mangroves. Some chicks are just a week old. In all wading bird colonies, there is constant bickering. The birds are safer in bunches, and they want to be together, but they just don't want to be too close. Within view of that scene is a nest of 3 gangly chicks, at least a week older. Hey, if you run out of feathers to preen, you can always nibble the guy next to you. these birds will stay pale pink for at least a year, regardless of how many shrimp they eat. Then, the color of their feathers will begin to deepen. In the younger nest, there is trouble. A fallen chick is climbing into the wrong nest. No intruder is allowed in, not even a neighbor's defenseless baby. Another chick tumbles into the nest, but the parent immediately recognizes it as one of its own. And what will become of the little intruder? It will be jabbed and pestered until it is driven out. On the edges of scattered ponds throughout the Everglades, small heron rookeries become active in early spring, a few months after the spoonbills have nested. These colonies of tricolor herons, great egrets, and snowy egrets have been shrinking due to the shortage of water in the Everglades. But even so, they are busy places, and in April, we find nests in all stages of development. By late April, a snowy egret is using food to entice her young to fly. At first, the meals are given free of charge. But after that, the mother hovers over her young, and in this way lets them know that they have to fly to her if they want more food. From the palmettos, the chicks can see their mother on a nearby tree. They are excited. One bird in particular fights hunger versus the fear of jumping off the palmettos. At last, hunger wins. But hey, guys, now I'm stuck over here. On the pond, a moorhen uses food to lure her chicks into unfamiliar waters. Her babies are much too small to fly, but already they are good swimmers, though not as fast as Mom. It's a bitter wind that gusts over the Everglades in April and May. Bitter because the prairies and most of the ponds have been dried out by it. It is dry, too dry. The periphyton is now just a cracked wafer on a parched ground. To the north, Big Lake Okeechobee is no longer able to help the Everglades as much as it should. Too much of its water is being diverted by a giant canal system that was started in the early 1900s and spread like a web. As Florida grew, the canals began supplying more water to the cities and less to the glades where it used to go. Today, a complex network of floodgates and pumps moves the water by canal throughout the system. Man controls what nature used to. Many of the housing developments in South Florida are built on former wetlands, and these houses use lots of water. For crops, irrigation sprayers suck enormous quantities of water out of the aquifer, which also lowers the water table. In the summer, water covers the prairies and fills the ponds of the Everglades. Wildlife thrives. Historically, winter was a time when prairies would go dry, but most ponds would remain fairly full. Today, however, winter water levels are so low that only the few deepest ponds can survive to provide a place for aquatic animals. Populations of fish and aquatic insects become depleted and can't rebound adequately. This in turn leads to a decline in predators. To make matters worse, the water being sent south to the Everglades is no longer pure. Fertilizers that are applied to crops near Lake Okeechobee have added nitrogen and phosphorus to the water. Ironically, these black muck fields that are polluting the river of grass used to be part of it. In nearby Lake Okeechobee, blooms of algae and aquatic weed are indicators of too much enrichment. Farther south, in the Everglades, nutrient-loving cattails are replacing the sawgrass, proving that the problem is spreading. Contributing to all this was a project undertaken in the 1960s to channelize the Kissimmee River in order to bring more water to the lake. But it had the catastrophic effect of reducing the river's ability to remove pollutants. Is it possible to reverse these many problems? Marjorie Stoneman Douglas.
Yes, of course, there's every possible hope. Certainly there's a way to, we have to restore it. It can be done. It must, in fact, it must be done. We've got to restore the Kissimmee River. We've got to clean up Lake Okeechobee. And we've got to restore the sheet flow of the area. Of course it can be done. And indeed it must be done because it's too important for this part of the country. The country would be ruined if we let the Everglades perish.
In May, just before the beginning of the summer rains, conditions have reached their lowest point. The water in some ponds is nothing more than algae and mud blended by the tails of swimming alligators. An otter fishes in mud so thick only air-gulping catfish can survive. Because of the lack of oxygen in these waters, the bass and sunfish that were here died weeks ago. If the rains don't come soon, the remaining catfish will either dry up or be cleaned out by the otter. An alligator whose pond has vanished is out searching for water. It is thin and hungry. In the spring, as the waters shrink away, alligators are forced into fewer and fewer ponds. This is a dangerous time. Alligators are hungry now, and among the males, tensions are building as they begin to compete for mates. In a bizarre ritual, males raise their heads, freeze like statues, and let loose with terrible head slaps. The other males are sure to be impressed or annoyed. A head slap starts a savage fight. Suddenly, the wounded challengers are frozen into strange poses. Their neighbors inch closer in riveted curiosity. Things seem certain to explode at any moment, but all this attention seems to take the starch out of the fighters, and they soon back down. In the spring, both male and female alligators bellow to let the world know they are ready to mate. The males are much larger, and their bellowing is slower and deeper. The trembling skin of the gator sets the water to dancing. Cleaving the air, the swallow-tailed kite needs no reminder of the need to raise young. Its own inner clock is sending the same signal. In the springtime, a pair of these rare and beautiful kites is seen flying together over the tall pines. At times, neighboring kites join them in a great swirling celebration, as if to bless the tree in which they are building their nest. From beneath the belly of a cloud, a kite makes a death-defying dive, just to ruffle its feathers. Sticks for the nest are juggled from foot to mouth, as if to perform wonders. Swallow-tailed kites are more finely built than most other birds of prey. Their feet and beaks are more delicate, and their prey is smaller. But what kites lack in power, they possess in grace. They are the most magnificent flyers. Kites are high nesters, and in order to get up to their level, our filmmakers had to put up a 50-foot tower blind. For the better part of a month, Rich and Judy Kern and John Green took turns filming from their precarious perch. The chicks were only a week old when they started to film them. When they are hunting, swallow-tailed kites swoop down over the fields and snatch their prey in the air or sweep it from the plants. So total is their command of the air that kites can catch their prey on the wing and eat it while they are still flying. Surprisingly enough, dragonflies are the main food for adult kites. We see the kite strip off the wings of a dragonfly and begin to feed. In late May, a storm blew in from the Caribbean, and the summer rainy season made a dramatic start. High in the windy pines, one of the kites brought in a big Cuban tree frog. In the months ahead, afternoon thunder showers would disperse alligators and other wildlife into newly flooded wetlands to offer again a fighting chance for survival. By the time the storm had passed, the chicks had well-feathered wings. They were beginning to get a sense of what wings are for, and preening them became important. Throughout these days, green tree frogs were swept from the tops of trees and shrubs in great numbers. The filmmakers wondered how the kites could spot them as they winged by. A few days after the storm had passed, there was a sudden and horrible plague of mosquitoes. Mosquitoes made their way into the treetops, and there they found the nestling kites. Not ready to fly, the kites could not escape the biting swarms. For days they shook their heads to keep the mosquitoes from landing. Mosquitoes filled the pine needles beside them. But though for a time it was miserable for the kites, they did survive. And in a sense, it was a good omen, because the mosquito is the food of the dragonfly, just as the dragonfly is the food of the kite. Therefore, what is the pest of today will be the food of tomorrow, if things are allowed to proceed as they should. And proceed they have for the mother alligator, and very well too, we might add, because on this day in late August, little cries can be heard coming from within her nest of sawgrass. For 2 months, the mother has waited for the sounds of her young, and today she will work to set her babies free. Some will be helped out of their shells. Some babies will be carried ever so gently down to the water, clenched between jaws that will not dare to close. Outside the belly of each hatchling bulges a fat yolk sac. For at least a week, the babies do not show any interest in catching food. During this time, they explore the world around them, but they do not stray very far from the mother. But it is not the fate of every egg to add a healthy hatchling to the brood. Feeling no movement in her mouth and realizing this embryo is dead, the mother swallows it. By mid-September, the baby alligators have run out of yolk. They are thinking about the world around them and how they might gain from it their first meal. There will be no food provided by the mother. Baby alligators are born predators. A wounded dragonfly stirs the surface. For one quiet moment, the alligator is unsure that the dragonfly is living prey, until the insect wipes its head. It will be a long and perilous struggle for the baby alligators. So few will survive to rule as their parents do, a part of the wet and grassy realm. They will struggle not only against their fellow creatures, but against a habitat imperiled by our hands, which have reshaped the natural system and made scarce its most precious resource. To whom, then, does the water belong? That is a question that hovers over every marsh, hammock, and pond, and is felt by every living thing in each vast and beautiful expanse of the Everglades.